Let's check out 10 inventions you never knew were Polish.
They've changed the way we live. They come in all different colours, shapes and sizes. You don't always understand them. Sometimes explaining it can be a little difficult. But they've helped us shed light on the world that we previously knew very little about. All of them landmarks in technology, and they all have one thing in common. They were made by Poles. Oh, kurczę, you might say. I had no idea a Pole invented that. But the English-speaking world often keeps the records, and maybe they were having problems with the spelling, let alone the pronunciation. In this video, we're shedding the limelight on the top 10 inventions made by Poles, at home and abroad. Number 10. The WalkieTalkie. Born in Warsaw in 1909, Henryk Magnuski worked as a radio repairman for the Polish military, and he eventually ended up in Chicago. Surprise, surprise. It was here that he would be employed by the Galvin Manufacturing Company, which would later change its name to Motorola. Leading a team of radio engineers, they developed the SCR 300, the first radio to be used by American forces in Europe. This revolutionary mobile device became known amongst GIs as the walkie-talkie. Nowadays you can find the walkie-talkie in just about any line of work. Take this part-time construction worker for example, overseeing Magnuski's head. Number 9.
The walkie-talkie. They are still used now. Definitely still used now. And to think that the guy had actually moved to the United States and it was used for war purposes. How often are things invented because of the necessity that war brings upon you? That is a common theme with inventions, I think, quite often. There is a need, and therefore someone is clever enough. But walkie-talkies are so important, actually, because I think the technology has allowed for those extra things, the modern devices that we have now.
9. Esperanto. Imagine a world where there is one neutral language that everyone can communicate in. A language of understanding and diplomacy that has the power to end international conflicts.
Esperanto. So I wouldn't really know what it was until it started explaining it. But I think it is, basically, it was an idea of having a language, not the first language of your country, but a second sort of language that sort of everyone around the world knows, and therefore everyone can communicate in that one language. I don't know anyone that speaks Esperanto. Please do tell me if you do, because what does it even sound like? I may have to do some learning.
And foster world peace. That was the dream of a linguist from Białystok by the name of L.L. Zamenhof. While studying in Warsaw as a young man, he began to develop Esperanto, largely based on his knowledge of the Romance, Germanic and Slavic language groups, but with a much simpler grammatical structure that could be easily learned. A simple language invented by a Pole. Who'd have thought?
Yes, because the Polish language is really difficult. I so want to learn it, but it just goes in one ear, out the other, and not out my mouth. That is basically what happens most of the time. I can do some words, but not many. However, I can say La kucha es subscribucha. Maybe I said it right, I don't know.
After more than 30 years of development and several books published, the first World Esperanto Conference was held in 1905. Since then, the movement of Esperantists has continued to grow, and today there are an estimated 63,000 to 2 million speakers of Esperanto.
I don't think that's enough speakers to be worth anyone's time, if I'm honest. No, that's not enough. Considering it wants to be a sort of a universal language, and how many billions on the planet, that is literally not even a grain of salt.
Number 8. The Kerosene Lamp. The story of the kerosene lamp can be traced back to the present-day Ukrainian city of Lviv, which used to be Lwów, Poland. It was here in 1853 that two Polish chemists, Jan Zek and Ignacy Łukasiewicz, attempted to distill alcohol from oil, which at the time was an incredibly cheap resource being extracted in the region. Though they failed to make anything potable, at least not to any self-respecting spirit connoisseur, What they did discover was a clear flammable liquid that burned long and bright, and more importantly, it didn't stink like oil. Putting the liquid called kerosene to work, they asked a local tinsmith to make a lamp with a small tank at the bottom. Thus, the classic shape of the kerosene lamp had been born.
That is how important as well was kerosene. The typical image of kerosene is when you see, miners down a mine, obviously. That's a big time when you see it. So the importance of that, yeah, well done.
Number 7. The railway signal device. Jan Josef Baranovsky deserves the award for the most proactive employee of all time when it comes to his work for the French railway. Fleeing Poland after the failed November uprising of 1830, Baranovsky first worked as a bank teller and cashier in France, before he landed a job as a bookkeeper for the National Rail Network. Baranovsky made several key inventions for the railway system, including the first ever ticket printing machine that could spit out 5,000 tickets an hour, and each with a unique serial number. But at a time when railroad accidents were becoming more and more frequent, it was Baranovsky's automated railway signalling device, invented in 1857, that made the biggest impact on the industry.
I think this is one of those devices that probably would have been invented whether it was this guy or it was someone else. I think something like this would have been invented just naturally over time. But maybe not as soon, 1850, whatever he said. But I think it would have been invented because when there's a need, they create things. But still, that was very early on he did this.
Prior to this, signalling depended on employees waving flags at various points along the track, as well as their knowledge of when and where the trains were coming from. In an age of increasingly busy railway lines, the Baranovsky signal, as it became known, avoided countless accidents and undoubtedly saved a lot of lives. Number 6. The telectroscope. Jan Szczepanik, often referred to as the Polish Edison, made several contributions to technology throughout his lifetime. However, it's his version of the telectroscope, produced in 1898, that is considered to be a landmark in the development of telecommunication.
I don't even know what a telectroscope is. This is one of these problems with these invention videos when I don't even know what that actual item is.
A telectroscope is a scope and lens, amplified with electricity, that can reproduce images from a distance. Sound familiar? You may not be surprised to know that the term telectroscope was replaced around the turn of the century with the word television. Though he was certainly not the first, Szczepanik's weird machine, as it was called, is alleged to have been able to recreate colour, which would make Szczepanik the forefather of colour television.
Wow.
Number 5.
There you go. So can we say a Polish man invented the television? Sort of. That's always the thing. When you look at people that invented stuff, it's at what stage and what part of an object did they invent? Because, that, for example, was not the television. However, you had to have that to possibly create what became the television. So he didn't technically invent the television, but the parts that were necessary to actually become the television. That's incredible.
The paperclip. Whilst the person behind the idea of the mighty paperclip has long been disputed, one contender for your praise may be the famous Polish pianist and composer Józef Hoffmann. Praised by many as the greatest pianist that ever lived, Hoffmann was also an inventor in his spare time. It's been suggested that the inspiration behind the shape of the paperclip was the treble clef, no doubt burned into his brain after hours of reading piano scores. Hoffmann is also accredited for developing one of the earliest mechanical windscreen wipers, which apparently was inspired by the back and forth motion of his metronome.
Well, that is certainly two different types of invention. The paperclip, you don't necessarily see them very much anymore. I still use paperclips for keeping notes together and paper together. I don't think you use paper clips quite as much. Maybe in teaching, an office work you would do. But then you think of the windscreen wipers. It's interesting how quite often inventors can look at another object and think, that sort of motion and style would work on something else. That's really interesting.
Number 4. The electric-powered submarine. Although experimentation with submersible craft had existed since the mid-16th century, it was a Pole who first successfully created a submarine powered solely by electricity. Mechanical engineer Stefan Zhevietsky was taken on by the Navy of the Russian Empire in 1877, and it was here that he made a huge number of developments in submarine technology. The biggest of these came in 1884, when he installed a battery-powered propeller to a one-man submarine that could chug along at a steady 4 knots an hour. While it may sound slightly unimpressive now, this was a major technological advancement at the time, and especially considering the fact that most submarines were still relying on coal power and oars.
See, looking at that now, it seems quite a simple idea. Basically, a battery that powers a propeller, watertight. That one doesn't seem very... Once you've got electricity and you know about conducting electricity and that can power, which they clearly did at this point, that one doesn't seem as impressive.
Outside of submarine technology, Zhevietsky is also the guy who invented the taximeter, of all things. Number 3. The vote counting machine. Oh look, it's our friend Baranovsky again. The mid-19th century was a time of renewed interest in liberal democracy, and public voting was taken very seriously. Realising the overwhelming task of counting votes, as well as issues of scrutiny and impartiality, Baranovsky conceived the idea that it would be better for a machine to do all the counting instead. No doubt his obsession with numbers was the major motivator behind this, and other machines he patented as well include the gas meter. Yes, apparently he invented that as well. Wow. Number 2. Cotton swabs.
Now these are contentious. I don't... See, cotton swabs, now, what would you really call them? I don't think many people would call them cotton swabs. What would they call them? They would call them earbuds. They would call them earbuds, wouldn't they? If I wanted them, waxy, you say, can you get me an earbud? But they're not very good for your ears. You shouldn't be sticking them in your ear. But what else would you use them for? Maybe, I know my wife uses them for possibly touching up nail polish. What else would you use it for? Rubbing off paint with alcohol, tiny little bits, maybe?
A cornerstone of modern hygiene, the cotton swab was developed by Leo Gestanzang, a Pole from Warsaw who made the Chicago move in 1912. The story goes that in 1923, Gestanzang found his wife, Jutta, applying cotton wads to toothpicks in an attempt to reach those hard-to-clean places. This became the inspiration behind the Q-tip, Q standing for quality. But unlike his wife's toothpick, the Q-tip had 2 cotton tips to allow for double takes. Number 1, the Bulletproof Vest.
Wow. To be fair, with the Polish history, that makes sense. Things to protect themselves. That is actually an invention that you think, Polish.
If you can stop a bullet, you're either Superman or a Pole. The first commercially produced bulletproof vest was made by a Polish priest named Kazimierz Zeglen, who travelled to the US in the 19th century. It was here that he came across the research of a George E. Goodfellow, a physician based out in the Wild West. It was Goodfellow that observed how gunshot victims who had silk fabric against their bodies often had reduced injuries when struck by a bullet. Expanding on his research, Zeglen developed a centimetre-thick vest of layered and woven silk that could stop a bullet altogether. He publicly demonstrated his new invention in 1897. The priest wore the vest, and the assistant fired the bullet. But Zeglen's vest was not a viable product. It was slow to produce, not to mention the outrageous price tag of $800 US, which is about $25,000 today. Enter Pole number 2. Jan Szczepanik. I think you've been acquainted. Szczepanik, who had been developing automated weaving technology for years, teamed up with Zeglen and managed to work out the whole mass production thing. The Bulletproof Vest was a huge success amongst the rich and the famous who could afford the ridiculous price tag that still remained. Most notably, Szczepanik managed to palm one off to King Alfonso of Spain, and the vest saved his life during an assassination attempt. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is alleged to have been offered a vest, but turned it down.
Oh man. I would say he would have lived to regret that, but he didn't live, so he didn't regret it. Bad choice made by Franz Ferdinand.
And we all know how that turned out. Jeglen and Szczepanik eventually had a falling out over business relations, and although Jeglen never relinquished his authorship, it was Szczepanik's weaving production and entrepreneurship that made his profit greater. So much so, in fact, that Jeglen's contributions are all but forgotten today. It's also interesting to note that over 60 years later, it was an American woman of Polish descent, Stephanie Kwolek, that developed the polymer for Kevlar, the fabric which is used in today's standard issue bulletproof vests. So what did you think of our list? Were there any crucial Polish inventions that we somehow overlooked? Make sure you leave a comment below. And in the meantime, if you're interested in checking out more content on Poland,
go check this guy out. Thank you so much. There are some inventions that seem that they weren't very important, like the paperclip. However, I think something like a paperclip is underappreciated. And then you get the ones that are important for the time period. You know, the walkie-talkie in that time period must have been so important during the war to be able to communicate easily enough. Wow. To the bulletproof vest, such a simple idea of the layers of silk. Incredible. But what I do find fascinating is that what you get is certain inventors invent lots of things. I think you must just have a brain for it. You know, once you're an inventor, you're sort of always an inventor, and always you must have the mindset and of seeing things and thinking, that could be that. And it's fascinating. Who knew that Poles invented those things? Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, and hopefully you'll find more content that you enjoy. I will catch you next time.